We're going to get started here. Welcome. This is our third annual VC panel at aws-reinvent, and my name is Brad Steele. I lead the venture capital business development team at AWS. We've got a rock star panel lineup here for you guys today to talk about some of the trends in cloud over the last year, some of the things we're seeing, opportunities for further innovation in the cloud, investment opportunities, as well as what they foresee kind of on the horizon in 2015 and beyond. Real quickly, we're going to, I obviously have a handful of questions I want to cover, but I also want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions, but we need to keep it civilized. So throughout the next 35 minutes, call it, if you have any questions, you can submit them to vcpanel2014 at amazon.com. And my highly qualified, trained team of monkeys over here are going to go ahead and vet through those, and, we're going to go ahead and cover some of those questions at the end, probably the last 5 to 7 minutes or so. Yeah, let's get started without further ado. Gentlemen, if you could each kind of introduce yourselves, maybe 30 seconds on name, firm, and what your investment focus is, and then we'll kick off. Let's just start, Steve.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Steve Herrod. I've been in venture for about 1.5 years now. I was the CTO and head of engineering of VMware for the last 12 years. So it's a little weird to be at the Amazon conference, but very nice. And I'm at Greylock Partners, and obviously focusing on enterprise infrastructure, and particularly really love the move to Amazon from existing enterprises and all the tools that are in place to help that happen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ariel Tseitlin. I'm with Scale Venture Partners. Been there about 1 year. Similar to Steve, joined from the operating side. I was running operations and cloud tooling at Netflix before I came over to Scale. Now my focus is on enterprise software, primarily that which sells into the IT or the technical buyer. And Scale Venture Partners, been around for about 20 years, invest primarily in enterprise software, kind of mid-stage in the growth phase where early revenues are coming in, there's a product market fit, and sales and marketing dollars going towards growing the business.
Cool. Hey, everybody. I'm Chen. I also worked at VMware for about a decade before joining Greylock Partners. At Greylock, I focus on cloud and enterprise investments around both the cloud stack and the data stack. Sat on board of a company called Docker that had a really great day this morning in the keynote. And so ironically, from VMware to containers.
My name is McIlwain, and I'm a managing director with Madrona Venture Group. And I guess I'm the old guy in the venture business here. I've been around for 15 years. And we do early stage venture in the Pacific Northwest. And I focus on cloud and data-driven companies. And we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit more about that.
A little bit, yeah.
Afternoon, I'm Yarmon with Draper Associates, a seed stage enterprise and consumer venture firm based in the Bay Area. Been doing this 7 years, can't believe it. And I do everything. At the seed stage, you got to know a lot about a little and a little about a lot. So I am the oil slick, I think, on the panel.
Excellent. I wanted to actually, before we get started, survey the crowd. I just want to understand what the mix is. So by show of hands, how many of you are individual developers or with a startup? So, okay, it's impossible to count, but I'm going to call it 1/5. How about with a mid to large enterprise? Right, about the same number. Anyone from the public sector, so state, local, federal government? Very cool. Good to see some representation there. And how about anyone travel from outside the U.S. to be here? Wow. Yeah, so a nice global representation as well. So really excellent mix of startups, developers, large enterprise, mid-large enterprise, government. How many of you are working on like 3 hours or less of sleep over the last couple of days? We all about the same? Good. We'll make sure in the same boat here. Good. So let's dig in. Just want to start talking about trends and specifically one trend, but just to look back a little bit, I was looking back at 2012 and 13 at reInvent. 2012 was the start of reInvent, and back then you could argue that cloud was a bit in its infancy still, and a lot of the questions leading up to reInvent and then circulating around were around what can I put in the cloud? How do I move to the cloud? How do I form a cloud strategy? What's the difference between private and hybrid clouds? Security was a big issue. Last year, 2013, dominated by big data, Internet of Things, mobile app development platforms. This year, I think undoubtedly the biggest trend we're hearing a lot about in the blogosphere and reading about, and big announcement today, is around containers. So I'd love to get your perspective on what's the significance of this containerization movement? Is it overhyped? Is it just hype, or is it truly a big deal? And if it is a big deal, who are going to be the winners and losers if it continues on its current trend? Let anyone, either of you start. Jerry, why don't you start? You're the Docker guy. You know a little bit about this.
You know, honestly, I think containers is a big deal. I mean, we wouldn't have invested last year into Docker if we didn't think containers was evolving to be this sort of fundamental building block or atomic building block for the cloud. And I think in the past 6-9 months, the amount of enthusiasm both around the open source project and the technology has been overwhelming. So Amazon, Google, Microsoft, VMware even, pretty much every major cloud provider, system provider is now embracing containers because it solves this great problem of A, portability that virtualization first unlocked, but the other half of that value of Docker is not just the portability, but the aesthetic around developer productivity. So, OS containers have been around for a long time. We looked at them a lot at VMware. We looked at them a lot in the Linux world, in the Unix world. But what Solomon really nailed was the developer aesthetic and how to make using containers and using Docker easy and portable for the way developers in the cloud like to operate. And so if you think about this generation of developers coming out of school and startups now being born on the cloud or cloud native, we talk about like mobile native teenagers, these cloud native developers are learning to develop and manage their clouds in Docker. And so I really see it as unlocking that true cloud portability and that true kind of cloud enabler, if you will. Anyway, my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I mean, I think you're absolutely right on the developer side. That's one of the huge benefits that containers add. In terms of next big thing or overhype, I actually think the answer is both. I think it is going to be the next big thing, but I also think it's overhyped where it's the be-all, end-all. It's going to solve all of your problems, and it is a huge step forward. But there's still a lot of things that it doesn't solve for you. And if you're building things in a cloud-native way, there was a lot of what containers do for you that you can already achieve with VMs and just using the VM as your basic building block in the same way that containers are letting you use that as a basic building block. And when I was at Netflix, for example, we had built the entire deployment pipeline and all of our build processes so that from the point a developer checks code in, that creates an AMI, and that AMI gets immutably moved from test to staging and to production, and that gets auto-scaled. So you could do a lot of the things of what containers do today, albeit with a little bit more work. So it does lower the barrier for the rest of companies out there that might not be on the same kind of leading edge as Netflix to have that. But I think the more powerful thing that it allows you to do is to take legacy applications and bring them into the cloud in a much more compact and performant way. And that's one of the things that VMs, it was a lot harder to do with VMs. That, now with Docker, you can have 10 different applications that you now bin pack into large machines out in the cloud, and then load balance and distribute them. Very similar to the demo that Amazon gave earlier. And that I think is actually a huge benefit of containers.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things here is, at the moment, containers and Docker are a little bit like OpenStack was a couple of years ago. And what's happened so far in OpenStack, although progress has been made, is that I have no doubt that the brand of OpenStack is going to be an important player in the cloud movement, but I'm not sure who's going to be the winners and losers even still. Because in addition to the herding of the cats, which is the open source movement, you got the dancing of the elephants that came to the party all too soon, which is all the big players that are trying to influence OpenStack. And so we're starting to see the elephants in different forms already come to the party in containers very rapidly. Yep. And so I think that we're going to still be talking about containers 2, 3, 5 years from now. I actually think we're still going to be talking about Docker, but the Docker, the company, is going to look very different from what it looks like today, as well as many of the other players that are emerging like Shippable and even Core OS and the role that they play within the containerization movement.
Yeah, maybe last thing that I mentioned is, it's a great new technology and it's going to be very good for a class of applications and a class of users. And I think the opportunity for startups is to help enterprises more aggressively adopt it. And looking at a way to move from here to there is something I think always provides a really good opportunity. So whether it's around security or management or monitoring, a way to help people adopt that, I think, is where several of you might be able to form really nice startups.
Yeah, Docker's written for developers, and when I think of developers, I think of individuals or teams of 1 or 2 people that can move very, very quickly. And that's why it's gotten such a groundswell, right? It's because you people in the room, just like, yeah, I want to do this, and I can turn on a dime. you know, I think you nailed it. The big enterprises with virtualization, probably what, 80% of what Docker can do, 90%, and all the way through the stack. So I don't see Docker as being mature enough yet for large-scale deployment at, you know, insert big bank name here. But it's certainly the thing du jour that's coming, and yeah, I don't know what it's going to look like in a couple of years, but it's certainly worth making bets on.
I was really hoping you guys are going to be able to identify who the losers are going to be, but I get it, and the analogy was great, but that would have been a lot of fun. But how's it impacting you as investors and your investment thesis and the sort of things that you're looking at? Has it changed your perspective as an investor, investing in cloud, investing in SaaS, cloud infrastructure?
I mean, I can speak for myself. It hasn't really made any fundamental changes in the way we look at investment opportunities. I mean, it's certainly, I mean, you can look at it from two perspectives. As you know, one is containers as a technology that startups use in order to more quickly get to market, and another one is, you know, investments around the Docker ecosystem. And you know, as a technology that companies use, that's just another one of many that they have available to them. And you know, I wouldn't say that that changes investment strategy too much. You know, in terms of the ecosystem, that certainly does create some interesting opportunities around, you know, like Steve said, security and management and kind of all the rest of the ecosystem that you need as a mature organization to actually operationalize that technology. And that's interesting.
You know, I think it's neat. It's actually indicative of a broader trend. I think a couple of years ago, if you had these panels or discussions, a lot of discussion was how marketing departments are driving IT change. And that's still happening, but I think Docker's shown really how developers are now impacting infrastructure decisions even more than ever. And I think since developers are the precious resource and the always limiting factor to doing something new, any type of infrastructure company that helps developers be more productive, I think, are the ones that are really going to play out. Sure. And that's changed definitely the way a lot of us look at traditional infrastructure investments. It's how does it make the developer more productive?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's being eaten from the top and the bottom. The brand new startups are going to be all in the cloud. The existing legacy stuff are going to have some kind of a hybrid thing. And so where does Docker play into both of those, and how that shapes my investment thesis for the early stage and the later stage is kind of how I'm thinking about it today.
Good, good. Let's switch gears a little bit. So big data, dark data, Internet of Things, predictive analytics, all data-centric terms we've been pounded over the head with over the last 12 to 18 months. Just tremendous innovation in applications and technologies that enable people to you know, create or extract and create and analyze and utilize data in their business decisions and their processes. So what opportunities still exist in regard to the next kind of generation dataware and that companies, individuals, developers, startups, enterprises can start thinking about to take advantage of?
Well, you know I like this term dataware, and
that's where I got it from.
what dataware essentially means, I mean, you know, John Tukey was a statistician that coined the term software in 1958, and we all take it for granted now. I think 10, 20 years from now, we will all take for granted that there's this different concept called dataware. And dataware basically means data-driven, at the very top of it, it's data-driven applications and services. It's insight-driven applications and services. It's the difference between Exchange and RelateIQ. I mean, why does Salesforce.com pay $400 million for a company doing less than $5 million in revenue? It's because they were doing a little bit of machine learning pixie dust on top of a silo of data called Exchange. And there's a whole stack in this dataware, you know, economy, which starts with all the stuff that's gotten the hype to date, where all the investment's gone to date, by and large, which is the Hadoop ecosystem and the next generation data store ecosystems, the Mongos and the Cassandras, et cetera. That's just the enabling infrastructure. That's probably overfunded at this point. But the next two layers, the layer that's the data intelligence, where all the algorithms and data models and predictive services are being built and need to be built to close the gap between the scarcity of data scientists and the abundance of data. That data intelligence layer is where investment's happening probably by a lot of us right now. We're investors in a company called GraphLab as an example. But it's these data-infused apps and services that live on top of that in real time, probably powered by things like the Lambda service, which, you know, after thinking about it, that was the most exciting announcement for me out of everything that was announced, because it's forward-looking. And it's going to enable, from a software and event-driven perspective, with real-time data, data-infused apps and services over the next decade as we move from software automation to software intelligence and dataware.
So one of the things that I think is a big gap around data is To Matt's point, we're collecting a bunch of data, and it's more real time. So look at the event data, Lambda, it's real time, it's streaming, there's a massive amount of it. But there's a disconnect between the collecting, processing data in real time, our ability to act in real time. And so we talk about this real time enterprise, but the reality is there's a gap. Humans and most business processes don't react in real time. So even though we get updates right away that a shipment's delayed or the forecast is off, there's a huge gap between getting that email, that notification, and actually someone doing something about it. Do I need to like walk across the department, send an email out, make a phone call? And so as you think about enterprise applications, data really impacts 2 or 3 things in an enterprise workflow. It's one, reporting, so visualizing and getting information of what's going on, or B, it's making some process faster, more efficient. And so I think that last mile, if you will, is that turning an enterprise operationally from this kind of asymmetric, paper, pen, and kind of automated enterprise to fully real time. And that's as much technical as it is just people-oriented and operationally. And I think we often forget that as developers, like we can move and program in microseconds of latency, but the rest of our departments, sales, marketing, et cetera, don't move at that latency. So I think there's a lot of areas where we need to take advantage of data and software, in fact. So.
Yeah, the future is not the people sitting in this room. We're all very good at asking our own questions in code or machine code and coming up with the answer. But it's going to be the people in accounting and HR and finance saying, not what is the question, but here's the question and here's the answer, and this is what happened, right? And so it's just a fuller stack of I think the machine code and the automation going through into more of the business world than the IT and the programming world.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your first question, I think there's an incredible amount of innovation still left. I guess the way I think about where we are today is kind of in 3 waves. When it comes to data, the first wave was all about just getting data digitized, right? So from pen and paper into and Excel into structured systems like CRM, where you can now trend it and track it and view it over time and actually create business processes that automate some of your interactions, the interactions of your business and the processes. So that was kind of wave 1. And then wave 2 was now taking all of that data and then multiplying it. So that's kind of the, what we tend to call big data is, now storage is incredibly cheap, compute is incredibly cheap, so now you can store all this data and then you can do interesting things on it. And now you can get more insights and, you can query things and you can actually understand your business in a much deeper way than you've been able to do before. And that's what, NoSQL and Hadoop and kind of those technologies have enabled. And that was wave 2, and I think we're kind of right in the midst of that. And then wave 3, which is, I think, where a lot of the innovation is very much the way Matt and Jerry both described. That's where you now allow the software to make decisions that were previously done by humans, and you build that into the systems themselves so that now you can have algorithms that essentially make your workflows more powerful. So as a salesperson, instead of going into your CRM system and looking at all of your leads, now your CRM system tells you, hey, these are the top 5 leads that you should call on today because we've done a bunch of analysis and we know that their profiles are the ones that are most likely to lead to conversion. And when I think about wave 3, there's kind of 2 levels where really interesting innovation happens. One is at the apps level, so things like CRM, things like HR, financials, and so on. Where those become more intelligent and build more, basically help the process run more effectively by taking away some of the human decision. And the second tier is kind of at the infrastructure level. So when you think about data ingestion, when you think about ETL, all of the things that the data teams and data scientists do with data today is incredibly manual and very, takes a lot of hours. And so a lot of those things can now be automated with algorithms so that they can do the things that they're best at doing, which is actually analyzing the data rather than building out the infrastructure.
We should talk. I've got a company for you to fund.
Maybe one last observation, forgetting the technical side of it. I think one other thing that's happening right now is as these platforms build up, they tend to go from general applications to starting to focus on verticals. And I think what we're probably going to see over the next few years, people building the first automated applications on big data or the first specifics for retail of different types. And we're seeing that in SaaS already, and I think that's kind of a similar path we'll follow.
No, I think that's right. And you just look at these very specific examples. And we've actually funded a company that is trying to take Amazon's real-time pricing and merchandising expertise, because a bunch of ex-Amazon guys, and make it available for all the other e-commerce companies. Well, that's a data problem. And that's a real-time system because you're changing prices all the time. And you need to know for this product, and ideally over time, not just for this product at this point in time, but for this visitor, should I change the price or make a promotional offer in real time? And that's very, very hard to do today. I mean, it's impossible to do today, but it's going to be doable in not too many years because of this. As you move up the stack, you can have these real-time predictive and recommender services that are infused within your applications. And I completely agree with the vertical point, whether it's in that case, which is essentially merchandising, or it's in something like helping the IT organization run the business of IT, which is what Apptio and others are doing.
So what do you guys think is the most interesting battleground for cloud today? So looking at it as from developers, startups, enterprises, government, even looking at it from other different geographies around the world that you are particularly interested in from a cloud battleground perspective.
I'll tell you what's great is to be a startup right now. I know everyone sees this, but Amazon and the different cloud vendors are certainly giving incredible incentives to get people started for the first time on the cloud. Obviously, you spend a lot of time on this, so it's fantastic for really helping people bootstrap, and obviously the goal is to become a big company on top of it. So that's a pretty fierce battleground, it appears.
One area that I spend time thinking about for cloud and the adjacent market mobile is you think about today, most developers, most app, and the corpus of web data is English speaking, English first. But if you look out 5 or 15 years, a lot of that data is going to be in China and India and around the world. Number one. Number two, a lot of that data is no longer the web, right? There's a whole conversation on native apps versus mobile web. A lot of that data is now stuck behind apps, right, in the ecosystem. And I had a conversation earlier today about with a mobile developer, and all of a sudden with that data is one, behind a native app, and two, in different languages, different countries, how do we think about sharing and accessing that information across the world? And we're going from a world where it's mostly US-dominated web and data to kind of a very global, very mobile, and potentially very kind of siloed data areas. That's both a challenge for us and everyone in the room, as well as I think a great opportunity to think about how that world looks like in 15 years in terms of developers, the users, accessing the cloud from a smartphone, but also how do you make that work as well as the web does today?
Yeah, when you think about most of IT dollars still being spent on premise, then I think you have to start looking at what are the reasons that people aren't moving more of their workloads into the cloud. And the two most common reasons that you hear is one is cost and the second one is security. Cost, it feels like, is already kind of evaporating away as you start talking about agility and start talking about just faster pace of business innovation that you can have when you're in the cloud. But security feels like it's still a very real concern. And it's hard to peel away the perception from the reality because a lot of it obviously is still perception, where if you built the system in the way and hardened it in the way of experts being able to, then you could create as secure of an environment in the cloud as you do in the data center. But there's still a lot of plumbing that needs to take place there. So I think security is going to be a big area for innovation and a big gap right now for companies that are trying to move into the cloud and are suddenly finding themselves in a much more vulnerable security posture. We did a big research initiative at scale in the first half of the year where we talked to 100 different CISOs, and we asked them what are the things that are keeping them up at night and where are the risks. And we had some really interesting findings from that, and two or three of them out of that came out was one was your perimeter is fading away, and so now you got to focus on the data. And so how do you secure that data now that you no longer have a perimeter around you in the data center and you don't control your egress points anymore? So that's one difficult challenge when you're in the cloud. The second one is visibility, where you're dealing now with elastic and ephemeral instances. Things go up and go down. You have a vulnerability. How do you know if a server that you had running in the cloud was compromised when it's no longer around anymore? So how do you get visibility into your entire cloud environment? And then the last one is automation, where now that everything is API driven, you can do so much more from a software standpoint in order to secure and monitor and diagnose your environment, that you can actually, I believe you can actually have a much stronger security posture when you're in the cloud. But those are all, I think, really, right now, just white space areas for companies to go after.
I would say to the specific question of where's the most interesting battle, that's an easy answer. It's the enterprise. If you look at the other categories, there's kind of a clear market leader already. You guys are in many of those cases. The enterprise is far from proven. And what's most interesting is that the two biggest players, who are Amazon and Microsoft in the enterprise and cloud, have almost polar opposite strengths and weaknesses. You know, when you think about apps, one has apps, one doesn't really have apps. When you think about, you know, full product selling versus ingredient selling, you know, AWS has all these ingredients. Microsoft has more sort of full product-y solutions. One has on-premise, one doesn't have on-premise. So it shapes up to be a very interesting battle between Microsoft and Amazon and how they go to market in terms of who's going to win the hearts and minds of the enterprise and what kind of an ecosystem they can build around their platforms in order to win the hearts and minds of the enterprise. Because what's already happened is that the empowered edge of the enterprise, cloud is already being adopted. And that's actually a strategic advantage for AWS because they've got far more of that adoption to date. But I think time will tell, and I think Microsoft has a pretty strong hand in this area and should not be underestimated in the enterprise battle.
I don't know, I wouldn't discount the developers. I mean, I would argue that startups and developers have done more for Microsoft and Amazon and SoftLayer and all the other big players in Oracle to drag them along into where we are today than those big players pushing stuff down to developers and saying, here, do this. I think it's been more of a pull model. So yes, the enterprise is not solved. It's still very broken. It's a lot of legacy stuff, you know, running on COBOL, right, tandem, non-stops. In 10 years, I mean, software is leading the world today. In 10 years, if you're not all in the cloud, if you're not all Dockerized, whateverized, you're done. But it's developers that are, you know, creating the tools, and then larger companies like Chef, which are helping enterprise migrate along, and then at the smaller end, little companies like Cloudless, right? So the support infrastructure around that, which I think is going to pull the enterprise or push the enterprise at the forefront to continue to be the leading edge. And certainly from a revenue perspective, that's where I think most of the big dollars will be spent.
Good. So two-part question. Are there any areas in cloud that, I know we touched a little bit when we talked about the dataware question, so I think, Jerry, you touched on this a little bit, but that are overfunded or overhyped? And conversely, are there trends or part of the cloud that you think are underhyped? So essentially, where are the white spaces? What's got you excited right now?
Yeah, Jerry mentioned it, right? And it's internationalization. I mean, you know, average LTE speeds in the US are 15 megabits. Right? Not great, but it works, right? Half the world isn't online. And when they get online, they're going to get online through an Android version of probably what you have in your pocket. And they're going to want all the services and all the stuff that we do today, and they're going to have jobs like all of us do, and for big enterprises, you're going to have to push that stuff down to the last mile, places where the infrastructure hasn't been built yet. The other big thing that I'm excited about, you know, security, but also anti-NSA, right? Angela Merkel said, we want to build a whole separate European internet, physically separate. Okay, well, that's not going to happen. But for customers and economies and emerging economies outside of the US who look at what has happened inside the US over the last couple of years, say, hey, I don't want my data being looked at, and I'm throwing off more data than ever before. What's the strategy to secure that? Who's auditing that? How do I make sure it's secure? Right? Where's the SLA for that? I think that's really interesting, and I don't have an answer. You tell me.
I think an area that's underappreciated is the non-Google Android ecosystem. I mean, there is an increasing number of players around the world that, because Google lets them play by different rules partly around the world, are saying, you know, what are we going to do to take the Android, the base version of Android we can, build our own, you know, distro, and build an app ecosystem on top of that, and give the Heisman to Google and Google's, you know, mobile services. And I think that's a very interesting area, opportunities for investment, both at the app layer and at kind of the middleware layer of it. We're just beginning to see it play out.
So I'll continue this thread that I guess I started when I mentioned the international aspect as a battleground. if you look at the major players on mobile between Apple and Google, right, and iOS versus Android, and the set of services to match point applications that matter, Maps, like Waze was, who knew that Maps was the killer app for your smartphone? Turns out it's pretty valuable, right? Maybe on-demand cars like Uber or on-demand food is a killer app. But if you look at that scene between Android with both Google and the rest of the world, which I think is an underhyped area, versus the Apple ecosystem, that scene between both technology as well as individual apps, both consumers and enterprise, is a scene that I think is worth exploring that goes both to this mobile theme as well as I think international might be the way in. And it begs the question is, where's the next Microsoft or Google going to be found, right? Is it going to be China, India, or the US? And we're not debating geopolitics here, but if you think about a lot of interesting stuff will come in that scene. And overhyped, I'll tell you one that not only is overhyped or overfunded, one that I think it's going to take longer to figure out is Internet of Things or IoT. I probably hear those three letters, and I believe in an industrialized internet, I believe in smart sensors, but I think the usage patterns are still evolving there, and I think we don't, as humans and as enterprises, we don't think now in an IoT world, so we don't have our creativity wrapped around that quite yet. So I think we hear that a lot, we talk about it a lot, but the value is still a bit out.
I'll come back to developers. I think on the underserved piece of the puzzle right now, a lot of people here are very used to this new world of applications that are distributed and decomposed and made up of many microservices. But I think being able to create applications and test them and make sure they're performing well in this world where you have so many different parts is really going to be a challenge. So I get very excited about the tooling and the types of tools that need to be created, not only for this audience, but for enterprises who are for the first time going to create their own APIs and have others using them, or for people who are trying to debug why is this other service not responding in a real amount of time. I invested in a company called RunScope that's here that is designed to really try and help people understand what is this new world going to work like and how am I going to be able to work with it. So really tools that satisfy developers for this new class of application will be a big white space area.
Yeah, I mean, I hate agreeing on a panel, but I totally agree with that. The ability to not have to staff entire engineering teams who just have to think about how to build, deploy, and eventually even operate software, and have that be a third-party service that you can consume, which is a big trend that we see in the rest of the development stack. That's something that's such a huge enabler for innovation and agility that for some of us who have seen how it works well within companies, it's a surprise that it's taking such a long time to permeate through the rest of the enterprise. But that's an incredible opportunity where if you're a company now that doesn't take advantage of whether it's DevOps or continuous delivery or some of these new ways of getting code deployed and managed more quickly, you're going to be outcompeted by your competitors who are doing that. So that's going to be a huge differentiator, and I still think it's an unsolved problem that there's still a lot of work to be done on.
Any other thoughts on that? Okay. So we're going to get to some audience questions in a moment, but before we do, I just want to do a quick lightning round. And your only option is to answer yes or no. So, hot topic.
It's hard for a VC.
Yeah, no, I don't have to cut
Can
you
we
off.
start with a yes and then continue on?
What's that? Yeah. So, hot topic in Silicon Valley and all over the startup and VC blogosphere and ecosystem these days. We got sky-high valuations of startups. We got just massive equity rounds coming in. Burn rates supposedly going through the roof or continuously increasing. It seems like there's the return of ridiculous employee perks in some regard. We're even starting to see, there's also an explosion, obviously, of corporate VC and now seeing hedge funds starting to do Series A rounds, which is a bit scary. So are we in a startup bubble that's about to burst? Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot.
No.
Ariel?
Yeah. Am I allowed to say more or just one word?
Just no is good for now.
Yeah, no.
No. All right.
Yes.
No.
Hell yes.
I couldn't ask for
words.
anything better. Excellent. All right. Well, so why yes?
Besides being controversial, actually, the technical answer is no. Depends how you define bubble. And if you define bubble in the classic way, the truth is no. We're not in a bubble the way you would think of it, like tulips or maybe in .coms. But there are signs where I think there's rationality and discounting your risk is ahead of where we are, both in the public sector and the private sector and private valuations. And I think, so we're not in a bubble, but I do think there are areas where we're discounting risk. And so as investors and as entrepreneurs, that's a concern. So we're not in a bubble, but I do worry about how we think about risk.
So he said yes and then told you no.
I know.
And I said no, but let me tell you two areas where there is overvalue. So one is late stage privates. There are companies getting valued way more than they would get valued as a public company in late stage private rounds because there's so much capital and so many types of capital trying to go into that category. You know, and the Fidelities and Janices and T. Rowe's and all these guys are coming into that sector, not to mention the hedge funds, not to mention the corporate strategics. That is an overvalued, overpriced area right now. The other, somewhat counterintuitively, is the seed stage company who, with little capital, because you can these days in the cloud world, can get something up and running and they begin to get it like they've got a first few customers and it's working. The gap between what value they've really created at that point and you know, what people are willing to pay for that value and what they actually have de-risked is a big gap. And that's a risky place to be as a venture investor, you know, because those prices are higher than what's probably been de-risked in that business.
Yes, we're in a bubble in Silicon Valley, but I travel 70,000 miles a year. No, we're not in a bubble in other parts of the U.S. or the world.
Another qualified.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, interest rates are so low, capital is so cheap. You know, there are pigs on both ends, right? Pigs from venture firms raising bigger and bigger funds because they can, and pigs from entrepreneurs saying, well, so easy, I'll just, you know, move to the land of milk and honey and anybody will fund me. And then they whine and complain about a Series A crunch. Well, it's not Series A crunch, it's market efficiency, right? By people who know what they're doing. So make sure that you're doing something that's truly game-changing, truly revolutionary, truly world-changing. Don't just start a business to start it because, I mean, you know, nobody has to wonder what it's going to look like when the music stops, right? This is cycle number 3 or number 4, right? And we're at the top of the top. So maybe it keeps going, but certainly won't forever. So plan for that.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're just going to dig into a few audience questions. And question number 1, how do you integrate an evaluation of architecture and platform strategy in your diligence on potential investments?
Can you repeat, how deeply?
How do you integrate an evaluation of architecture and platform strategy as you're doing your diligence? I guess how critical and important is that in your diligence process?
I think it varies in type of company, right? And also the stage where you're at. So if you're a seed round super early, there's really not much besides some whiteboards or some architectures around how they've been building it out. When you're later on, you're thinking about scale and running a huge service for millions of mobile developers. For sure, we're going to spend a lot of time thinking through around how you think about scale, how you think about availability, how you think about what could go right, what could go wrong when everything goes right. Right? Yeah. If your service explodes overnight, like a Tinder or Twitter, what's going to fail? What are the breaking points? So I would say early, it's more, are the folks smart? Have they done it before? Do we trust the way they're thinking about these problems? And later on, when they're about to hit scale or hitting scale, I'll dig in more deeply on it. That said, it varies based upon the company, what percentage of the valuation or evaluation that is.
Yeah, I think more often than not, you evaluate the team more than the technology, and if you trust the technical team, then you're going to trust the fact that they're going to be able to, put the right architecture in place. And if you start second guessing the decisions that they made, then that's probably, indicative that it's not good point. You're questioning the founders. Platform is a dangerous word because whenever somebody tries to pitch a company as a platform, that's always something that's, I think, something that needs to be peeled back because that's just a hard thing to do, and more often than not, it doesn't work. But in terms of the architecture and the technology underneath, I think it's more about the team.
That's a good point.
I think what Ariel said is important. I don't, when people come out and pitch, this will be the platform for blah, people don't buy platforms, they buy solutions, and then platforms tend to follow from there. So I'd advise you to be careful when you say, we're shipping a platform as a startup. You have to solve a real problem first.
Excellent point.
Yeah, and it's funny because the answer is usually once we get to scale, then this platform will be amazing, but just selling a platform, you can't get to scale.
So, question 2. So you guys are all West Coast VCs. I didn't do a very good job of getting global representation, I think. But nonetheless, what is your appetite for investing in companies outside of your primary geography? So San Francisco, Seattle, et cetera. And how do you evaluate these companies differently than companies in your backyard?
Yeah, we're probably the hardest line on this. We really believe that early stage venture is a geographically focused local business. And we're fortunate that most of the companies we invest in are in the Pacific Northwest and in greater Seattle. We're delighted when folks decide they want to come to move to Seattle, because at the end of the day, we're your partner in rolling up our sleeves with you to help build the team, help think through the strategic questions, help amplify your story. And we can go on and on with the different ways that your venture investor partners should be helping build value and add value to you. And that's a lot harder to do at the seed and Series A stage if you're 3,000 miles away. So we have a bit of a strong bias on that. I know other people think differently, and I certainly think that the era of cloud makes it easier. But for us, strategically, it's not our focus.
How about Greylock?
We're similar. I mean, I think the early stage, Series A, seed, we're very biased for being close by. We want to be your first phone call when you have issues. We want to help you recruit. We want to be your advisor, your thought partner, and that helps when you're close by, number one. I think for the later stage, we'll do growth rounds here and there. We'll do things outside geography, New York, Boston, but typically most investments I looked at are Bay Area, West Coast. I'll look up in Seattle or down in LA. But we're very, very geographically centered. And the history is, I know Steve has a bi-coastal firm. Greylock started on the East Coast over 50 years ago, and because we felt like most of the good investments were on the West Coast, we moved the headquarters and the center of gravity to the Bay Area because it's a local business. And so now all the partners we hire now and almost all the deals we do are in the Bay Area. And so we actually believe in it, and we move the firm for it.
Excellent. For enterprise-focused startups, what advice would you give to better reach enterprise customers as well as compete with large legacy providers? It's a good question.
Real quick, because there's two things to think about when you compete against enterprises. And one of my partners calls is technology versus distribution. As a startup, you typically have better technology, and the incumbents have better distribution. They have sales force, they have channels, they have an installed base. And so the race is, as a startup, how do you build that distribution to go to market before the incumbents can either buy or build the technology to compete, right? And I think it's David and Goliath. So if you think about that, is you got the right technology, you either A, think of some orthogonal route to market. We can talk about different business models. B, leveraging third-party partners. I think Amazon store and the mobile app stores are great potential partners, but it's really trying to find some way to accelerate that, go to market, or find some judo partner out there to help slingshot you before the incumbents catch up and either buy one of the competitors or build something on their own.
It's nice now. A lot of the bigger companies, for the first time, really are having really good programs for working with startups. They have liaisons that will actually let you come in. And so startups can actually go to enterprises very early in the design process and get some help early on and understand there's so much oddities about selling into the enterprise market that you might not know if you haven't been there. My first investment was called Illumio, and from day one, they were actually working with big banks and retailers on exactly what they were going to need. So don't think you can't get the attention of those firms. Ask around and you'll find out they have liaisons for doing that first proof of concept and that first bit of feedback.
I think that's a really good point. And if you're selling into the enterprise and you haven't gone out and created some kind of a customer advisory committee or customer advisory board or customer program from day one, I think that's going to be really, really hard, because what you create this dynamic of, hey, I don't have anything to sell you right now. All I want is your advice. I want your perspective. We've got these ideas. We think there's this problem that we can solve better than it's ever been solved before. Let's have a conversation. And if you're methodical about that, we've got a company, Cumulo, which is a next-gen storage company. They have talked to over 500 customers, and they'll come out of stealth mode early next year. They've done some amazing things over the last 2.5 years, without having any kind of PR or public presence. The other thing that's important today, I think, is there's an and equation on bottoms-up and top-down selling motions. And so when we think about like some of the companies that have been hugely successful over the last decade, Splunk was very much a bottoms-up selling motion and then had to grow into a top-down. New Relic the same way. You know, in contrast, a company like Aptio was top down and is now, you know, growing and building its bottoms up muscle. I absolutely believe that's an and equation, and that you've got to be able to figure out where am I going to start, because sometimes I can start at the edge of the enterprise and get design wins at the edge of the enterprise, but ultimately I'm going to need to build my way up, and sometimes it's the reverse, depending on what your product market fit is.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add there is I think it's really important at the early stages of a company to be experimenting and exploring a lot of different ways to get to the market. And so, you know, you need to build that into the DNA of, you know, whether it's a self-service model or going after mid-market or going after enterprise. You know, you always want to be exploring, especially as your product matures. You might have different appeal to different types of buyers. So building that into the process of learning to go after different channels, after different marketing and different partners, and figuring that out and iterating over time.
Yeah, don't compete on price, fail quickly, and beg for forgiveness versus asking permission. All things that a big publicly traded company can't do.
Perfect conclusion. Well said. Well, thank you. We're out of time. Really appreciate y'all coming out. I hope it was helpful.